In the vast American Southwest, where red mesas stretch endlessly under burning skies, prejudice runs as deep as ancient riverbeds. But sometimes, in the most unexpected places, two lonely souls find each other against all odds. This is the story of Kira, a young Apache woman carrying the weight of her people's struggles, and Thomas, a weathered rancher whose heart had grown as barren as his drought-stricken land. If you're ready to witness a story that will challenge everything you think you know about judgment, belonging, and the power of human connection, then stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true life stories that will touch your heart. The Stranger in Copper Ridge setting. Copper Ridge, Arizona. Population 847. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Kira Yazzie stepped off the Greyhound bus, her worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder. The desert heat was already building, promising another scorching day in Copper Ridge, Arizona. She pulled her black hair back into a ponytail, revealing the distinctive turquoise earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. At 23, Kira carried herself with quiet dignity, but her dark eyes held a wariness born from years of moving from town to town, never quite fitting in anywhere. Her olive skin and angular features immediately marked her as Native American in a town where such heritage was either romanticized or reviled, rarely simply accepted. The bus driver, a middle man with kind eyes, handed her the last of her belongings. "You're sure this is where you want to be, Miss? Next stop's Flagstaff, bigger town, more opportunities." Kira managed a small smile. "I'm sure, thank you." As the bus pulled away in a cloud of dust, she stood alone on the cracked sidewalk, surveying her new temporary home. Copper Ridge was like dozens of other small towns she'd known: sun-bleached buildings, a main street that could be walked end to end in 5 minutes, and faces that turned to stare at anything unfamiliar. The whispers started immediately. "Is that an Indian girl? What's she doing here? Probably looking for handouts." Kira had heard it all before. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward the small diner where she'd arranged to meet the woman who'd offered her a job cleaning houses. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Martha Hendricks, a gray-haired woman in her 60s, waved from a corner booth. "Kira, over here, honey." The relief of seeing a friendly face was immediate. Martha had been kind on the phone, offering not just work but a small room above her antique shop. "How was your trip from the reservation?" Martha asked as Kira slid into the booth. "Long but peaceful. Thank you again for this opportunity, Mrs. Hendricks. Call me Martha, and you're welcome. Lord knows this town could use someone who isn't afraid of hard work." She lowered her voice. "I won't lie to you, some folks here aren't too welcoming to outsiders, especially ... double quotes." She paused delicately. "Especially Native Americans," Kira finished matter-of-factly. "I understand. I'll keep to myself and do my job." Martha's expression softened. "That's not what I meant, honey. What I meant is that those people are fools, and you shouldn't have to hide who you are for anyone." As they talked, Kira noticed a man sitting alone at the counter, occasionally glancing their way. He was tall and weathered, probably in his early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and hands that spoke of decades of manual labor. Unlike the others who stared with curiosity or suspicion, his gaze seemed more ... interested. Not in a threatening way, but as if he recognized something in her that others missed. "That's Thomas Brennan," Martha said, following her gaze. "Runs the Double B Ranch, about 15 miles north of town. Good man, but keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife about 5 years back, and he's been a ghost ever since." The man them looking and nodded politely before returning to his coffee. There was something in his eyes that Kira recognized. The same loneliness she carried. The same sense of being set apart from the world. After lunch, Martha showed her around town, introducing her to the few people who seemed receptive. But Kira could feel the weight of judgment following her down every street. By evening, she was exhausted, not from the physical journey, but from the emotional toll of being constantly evaluated and found wanting. That night, in her small room above the antique shop, she sat by the window looking out at the desert. The stars were brilliant here, unpolluted by city lights, and they reminded her of nights on the reservation with her grandmother, listening to stories of their people's strength and resilience. She thought about the rancher, Thomas, and the way he'd looked at her not with judgment, but with understanding. In a town full of strangers, he was the only one who'd seemed to see her as simply another person trying to find her place in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stares, new whispers. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, Kira allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Copper Ridge might be different from all the other towns she'd tried to call home. The offer that changed everything setting. Double B Ranch. Arizona. 3 weeks later, the drought had been merciless. Thomas Brennan stood on his front porch, watching the sun rise over land that had once been green and fertile. Now it stretched before him like a moonscape cracked earth. Dying vegetation, and cattle that grew thinner each day, despite his best efforts. He'd been fighting this battle alone for too long. Since Sarah's death, he'd let most of his ranch hands go, unable to bear the constant reminders of the life they'd planned to build together. But stubbornness and grief were poor substitutes for the help he desperately needed. The sound of an engine drew his attention. A dust cloud approached along the dirt road, Martha Hendrick's old pickup truck. As it grew closer, he could see she wasn't alone. The young Apache woman from the diner sat in the passenger seat. And even from a distance, he could sense her nervousness. Thomas walked down from the porch as Martha parked near the house. She climbed out with her usual energy, but the girl he remembered emerged more cautiously, her dark eyes taking in the sprawling ranch with a mixture of appreciation and wariness. "Morning, Thomas," Martha called out cheerfully. "I brought someone who might be able to help with your situation." Thomas nodded to both women. "Morning, Martha, Miss Yazzie." He was pleased to see surprise flicker across Kira's face at his use of her name. "What situation would that be?" "Don't play dumb with me, Thomas Brennan. Half the town knows you're drowning out here. Too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to hire it." Martha's tone was affectionate but firm. "Kira here is looking for more work, and you need someone who isn't afraid of hard labor and long hours." Thomas studied Kira carefully. She stood straight despite her obvious discomfort, meeting his gaze directly. Her clothes were simple but clean, and her hands showed the calluses of someone accustomed to work. "I appreciate Martha's concern," he said finally, "but ranch work isn't easy. It's hot, dirty, and demanding. The hours are long, and the pay, well, it's not much." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Kira replied quietly. "I've done ranch work before, on the reservation. I can handle livestock, mend fences, and I'm good with horses." There was something in her voice, a quiet confidence that reminded him of Sarah. His late wife had possessed that same steady strength, that ability to face challenges without flinching. "The thing is," Thomas continued, "some folks in town might not approve of you working out here. Being alone with me, I mean. People talk." Kira's jaw tightened slightly. "Let them talk. I need the work, and you need the help. If that's the only thing stopping you, then you're letting other people's small minds make your decisions for you." Thomas felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. The first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "You're right about that." He looked around at his struggling ranch, then back at her determined face. "All right, Miss Yazzie. If you're willing to give it a try, so am I. But I want to be clear, this isn't charity. You'll earn every penny, and I'll expect the same level of work I'd demand from any ranch hand." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Kira replied. Martha beamed. "Well, that's settled then. I'll leave you two to work out the details." She climbed back into her truck, then rolled down the window. "Thomas, you treat this girl right. You hear, she's got more grit than half the men in this county." As Martha drove away, Thomas and Kira stood in awkward silence for a moment. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the heat was already beginning to build. "Would you like to see the property?" Thomas asked. "Get an idea of what you're signing up for?" Kira nodded, and they began walking toward the barn. As they walked, Thomas found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining the challenges of drought, the complexities of cattle ranching, and the improvements he'd been unable to make alone. "The previous owner let things run down," he said as they examined a section of broken fence. "Sarah and I had big plans to fix it all up, but then ... He trailed off, surprised by his own openness. "I'm sorry for your loss," Kira said simply. "Martha told me about your wife." Thomas nodded, grateful that she didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. They continued the tour, and he was impressed by her questions. She clearly knew ranching, and she wasn't afraid to point out problems or suggest solutions. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was directly overhead. Thomas offered her water, and they sat on the porch steps, looking out over the struggling land. "Why did you come to Copper Ridge?" he asked. "It's not exactly a destination spot." Kira was quiet for a long moment. "I've been moving from town to town since I left the reservation, looking for, I don't know, a place where I could belong, I guess." Somewhere I could be judged by what I do rather than what I am. And you think this might be that place? She looked at him directly. I think this might be the place where I stop running and start building something. If you'll let me. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, loosening of the tight knot of grief and isolation he'd carried for so long. When can you start? Now, if you want. Martha's keeping my room, but I could use a place to stay closer to the ranch. Is there somewhere? There's a small cabin about a quarter mile from the main house. It's rough, but it's private and has running water. You're welcome to it as part of your wages. Kira's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. I promise you won't regret this. Call me Thomas. And I have a feeling you're right. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Thomas realized something had changed. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt hopeful about the future. The ranch would survive, and maybe, just maybe, he would too. Winds of change setting, moving between Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas 2 months later, the transformation was remarkable. In 8 weeks, Kira had proven herself more capable than ranch hands with twice her experience. She worked from dawn to dusk, her movements efficient and purposeful as she repaired fences, tended cattle, and tackled projects that had been neglected for years. But it was the changes in Thomas that were most striking. The hollow-eyed man who'd greeted her that first day had been replaced by someone who laughed occasionally, who took pride in his work again, and who looked forward to their conversations over evening meals. The Peterson Ranch sold, Thomas announced one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day. Family couldn't make it work anymore. They're heading back to Ohio. Kira looked up from the piece of leather she was repairing. That's the third family to leave this year. The drought's been hard on everyone. Maybe, but I think it's more than that. Sometimes people give up too easily when things get tough. She studied his face in the fading light. Is that what you were doing before I came? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, I think maybe I was. After Sarah died, it felt like the fight went out of me. The ranch was just a reminder of everything I'd lost. And now it feels like it might be something I can build again. Different than before, but still worth fighting for. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. 3 pickup trucks turned into the driveway, and Thomas recognized them immediately. Jake Morrison and his crew from town. His stomach tightened. Jake had been vocal about his disapproval of Kira working at the ranch, and Thomas had been waiting for this confrontation. Stay behind me, he told Kira, quietly as they stood to meet the visitors. Jake climbed out of the lead truck, followed by 5 other men. They were all armed, not unusually for ranchers, but the message was clear. Evening, Thomas, Jake called out, his voice carrying a false friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. We need to talk. About what? About the situation you've got going on here. Having that Indian girl living on your property, working alongside you, like she's one of us. Thomas felt anger building in his chest. Kira is an employee. What she does and where she lives is my business. See, that's where you're wrong, Jake continued, stepping closer. It becomes all our business when it affects the reputation of this community. People are starting to talk, Thomas, about what might be going on out here. About what kind of man hires a savage to stop right there. Thomas's voice was deadly. Quiet. You're on my land, Jake. You'll show respect to my employee and to me, or you'll leave. Now. Jake's face hardened. Your employee, is that what you call her? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've gotten mighty comfortable with having a squaw warming your bed. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Thomas felt Kira stiffen beside him, but when he glanced at her, her face was composed, almost serene. It was a look he'd seen before, the expression of someone who'd learned to endure hatred without letting it destroy her. You need to leave, Thomas said, his hand moving to rest on his sidearm. All of you. Now. We're not here to cause trouble, Jake said, raising his hands in mock surrender. We're here to offer you a way out. There's a buyer interested in your land fair price. Considering the drought, you could take the money, start fresh somewhere else. Away from all this ... complication. Thomas looked at the men surrounding them, then at Kira, who remained silent but alert. In that moment, he realized something important. He wasn't just defending his ranch anymore. He was defending something much more valuable, the possibility of redemption, of building something meaningful from the ashes of his old life. I'm not selling, he said firmly. This is my home, and Miss Yazzie is my partner in making it work. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the sheriff. Jake's expression darkened. The sheriff. Tom, you think Sheriff Collins is going to side with you over his own neighbors, over people who've lived here their whole lives? I think Sheriff Collins will uphold the law, which says I can hire whoever I want on my own property. For a tense moment, the two groups faced each other in the fading light. Then Jake spat in the dust and motioned to his men. This isn't over, Thomas. You're making a mistake that's going to cost you everything. As the trucks pulled away, Thomas felt Kira's hand briefly touch his arm. Thank you, she said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He looked at her in the growing darkness. This is as much your home as it is mine now. No one has the right to take that away from either of us. The confrontation marked a turning point. Word spread quickly through Copper Ridge about Thomas's refusal to back down, and the town began to divide into two camps. Those who supported Jake Morrison's position, and those who respected Thomas's right to make his own choices. Martha, of course, was firmly in Thomas's corner. About time someone stood up to Jake Morrison and his bullies, she declared publicly at the diner. That girl works harder than any 3 men in this town, and she's got more character than the lot of them combined. But the division came at a cost. When Thomas went to town for supplies, he found several businesses unwilling to serve him. The feed store owner turned him away, and the bank manager made it clear that his loan applications would no longer be welcome. We might need to drive to Flagstaff for supplies, Thomas told Kira one evening as they reviewed their dwindling resources. It's a longer trip, but at least we'll be able to buy what we need. I'm sorry, Kira said. This is all because of me. Maybe I should. Don't, Thomas interrupted. Don't you dare apologize for other people's ignorance. We'll figure this out together. Their relationship had evolved during these challenging weeks. What had begun as a simple employer-employee arrangement had deepened into something more complex, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared adversity. They worked together seamlessly during the day, and their evening conversations had become the highlight of Thomas's day. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Kira shared stories of her grandmother's teachings about resilience and finding strength in the face of hardship. Thomas, in turn, opened up about his dreams for the ranch and his fears about the future. Sarah always said this land had the potential to be something special, he said. She could see it even when I couldn't. Sometimes I think she would have liked you. Kira was quiet for a long moment. I think I would have liked her too. She must have been remarkable to inspire such devotion. But she's gone, and I'm still here. For the first time in years, I feel like maybe that's not such a tragedy after all. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Both of them felt the shift, the acknowledgement that their partnership had become something deeper. But neither was ready to name it yet. Content for now, with the growing understanding between them. The gift from the wind setting. Multiple locations across the Southwest. 6 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous postal worker who wouldn't meet Thomas's eyes. The return address was from a law firm in Phoenix, and Thomas felt his stomach drop as he read the contents. What is it? Kira asked, noticing his expression as she entered the kitchen after morning chores. Thomas handed her the letter. We're being sued. Jake Morrison and several other property owners are claiming that my employment practices are creating a public nuisance and affecting their property values. Kira read the legal document, her face growing pale. They're trying to force you to fire me through the courts. They're trying to force me to abandon my principles through the courts, Thomas corrected. But they picked the wrong fight. The legal battle that followed was exhausting and expensive. Thomas had to hire a lawyer from Phoenix, draining his savings and forcing him to consider selling parts of his land to pay for the defense. The local newspaper covered the story, and soon reporters from larger cities began showing up, drawn by the human interest angle of the case. Rancher fights for right to hire Native American worker. Read the headline in the Arizona Republic. The story painted Thomas as either a civil rights hero or a troublemaker, depending on who was telling it. The attention brought unexpected support. Letters began arriving from across the country, some hateful, but many expressing admiration for Thomas's stand. A civil rights organization offered to help with legal costs, and several Native American advocacy groups reached out to offer assistance. I never expected this to become so public, Kira said one evening, as they sorted through the latest batch of mail. I'm not sure I'm comfortable being the poster child for this cause. You're not a poster child, Thomas replied. You're a person who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The fact that standing up for basic human decency has become newsworthy says more about our society than it does about us. As the legal battle dragged on, life at the ranch continued. The drought finally broke in late summer, bringing blessed rain that transformed the landscape overnight. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the creek that had been dry for 2 years began flowing again. "It's like the land is celebrating," Kira observed as they watched the water rush over rocks that had been exposed for months. Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of renewal that went beyond the physical landscape. The ranch was thriving, but more importantly, he was thriving. The hollow man who had barely been existing after Sarah's death had been replaced by someone who found joy in each day's work, who looked forward to the future with hope rather than dread. The transformation wasn't lost on the people of Copper Ridge. Even some of Jake Morrison's supporters began to question their position as they watched the Double B Ranch flourish under Thomas and Kira's partnership. The couple's dedication to their work and their obvious care for each other became impossible to ignore. One evening, as autumn painted the desert in shades of gold and orange, Thomas found Kira sitting by the creek, watching the water flow past. He joined her on the bank, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about what you said that first day about me being judged by what I do, rather than what I am. What about it? I think I had it backwards. I was so focused on proving myself that I forgot the most important thing, knowing who I am, and being proud of it. My grandmother always said that the wind brings gifts to those who are ready to receive them. I think you were my gift from the wind." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. "And you were mine. The question is, what do we do with these gifts?" Kira turned to face him, her eyes bright with possibilities. "We build something beautiful together. Something that honors both our histories and creates something new." The legal case was resolved in their favor 6 months later, with the judge ruling that the plaintiffs had no legal standing to challenge Thomas's employment practices. The victory was sweet, but by then it felt almost anticlimactic. Thomas and Kira had already won the more important battle, the fight for their right to define their own lives and relationships. Jake Morrison left town shortly after the court decision, selling his property to a young family from California who were delighted to have such welcoming neighbors. The divide in Copper Ridge began to heal, helped by the economic benefits that the ranch's success brought to the community. Thomas and Kira were married the following spring, in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with Western customs. Martha served as the wedding coordinator, and even some of their former opponents attended, won over by the couple's obvious devotion to each other and their community. "I never thought I'd find love again," Thomas said in his wedding speech, his voice thick with emotion. "But Kira didn't just give me love. She gave me back my life, my hope, and my faith in the future." Kira's response was simpler, but no less profound. "My grandmother always said that the wind brings what we need, not always what we want. Thomas, you were everything I needed, and more than I ever dared to want." The Double B Ranch became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear, partnership over isolation. Thomas and Kira's success inspired other ranchers to reconsider their hiring practices. And slowly, the economic benefits of diversity began to outweigh old prejudices. 5 years later, the ranch had expanded to include a training program for young Native Americans interested in learning modern ranching techniques while preserving traditional ecological knowledge. Kira had developed innovative water conservation methods that combined ancient Apache wisdom with contemporary technology, earning recognition from agricultural universities across the Southwest. The program attracted students from reservations throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and even as far away as Montana and North Dakota. They came to learn not just about cattle and land management, but about building bridges between cultures and creating opportunities in rural communities. "Every time I see one of our graduates succeed," Kira told a reporter from National Geographic who was documenting their story, "I remember what my grandmother told me about the wind bringing gifts. We're not just teaching ranching, we're teaching people that they belong wherever they choose to make their home." Thomas, now in his early 50s, but looking younger than his years, had found his calling as a mentor to the young people who came to the ranch. His weathered hands, which had once worked alone in isolation, now guided others in the arts of animal husbandry, land stewardship, and most importantly, perseverance in the face of adversity. The transformation of Copper Ridge itself was remarkable. What had once been a dying town hemorrhaging population to larger cities was now thriving. The success of the Double B Ranch had attracted other innovative agricultural enterprises, a renewable energy cooperative, and even a small but growing tourism industry focused on authentic Western experiences and Native American culture. Martha, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, had expanded her antique shop into a cultural center that showcased both pioneer and Apache history. Funny how much more interesting our past becomes when we tell the whole story instead of just the parts that make us comfortable, she observed with characteristic directness. The legal victory had set a precedent that other civil rights attorneys referenced in similar cases across the rural West. What began as a simple employment dispute had contributed to broader conversations about inclusion, economic opportunity, and the changing face of American agriculture. But perhaps the most significant change was in the hearts and minds of the people who had witnessed Thomas and Kira's journey. Children who had grown up seeing their partnership as normal were entering adulthood with fundamentally different assumptions about what was possible between people of different backgrounds. One evening, as Thomas and Kira sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant reds and golds, they reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and prosperity. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't taken that chance on me?" Kira asked, leaning into Thomas's embrace. "Every day," he replied. "And every day I'm grateful that loneliness made me desperate enough to listen to my heart instead of my fears." A warm wind swept across the desert, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that had once been barren, and the sound of young voices drifted from the bunkhouse, where the newest group of students was settling in for the evening. "My grandmother would say that the wind is celebrating," Kira murmured, closing her eyes and letting the breeze wash over her face. Celebrating what? The fact that her granddaughter finally found her place in the world. And that love really can conquer fear, if we're brave enough to let it. Thomas tightened his arms around his wife, thinking of Sarah and the dreams they'd shared, of Kira and the reality they'd built together, and of the future that stretched ahead, filled with possibilities they were still discovering. In the end, the story of the Apache girl who was feared in town and the lonely rancher who called her his gift from the wind became more than just a tale of romance or even civil rights. It became a testament to the power of human connection to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And in the American Southwest, where the wind still carries messages between the past and the future, their legacy continues to inspire new generations to look beyond difference to the common humanity that binds us all. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are born not from fairy tale meetings, but from the courage to see beyond prejudice and fear. Thomas and Kira's journey from strangers to soulmates proves that when we choose understanding over judgment, we don't just change our own lives, we transform entire communities. Their story reminds us that every person we meet carries within them the potential to be our greatest gift, if only we're brave enough to look past the surface and into their heart. In a world that often seems divided, Thomas and Kira showed us that love, respect, and partnership can build bridges that seemed impossible to cross. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, courage, and transformation. If this story touched your heart and opened your mind to new possibilities, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for more inspiring true-to-life stories that celebrate the power of human connection. Like this video if Thomas and Kira's story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that love and understanding can overcome even the deepest prejudices. What did you think of their journey? Have you ever had to stand up for what's right despite opposition? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come on the wind when we're brave enough to receive them. Keep watching, keep believing, and keep your hearts open to the unexpected gifts life brings your way.